Hey guys, Thrasher here. It's February, and with a new month comes a new tier list. Let's talk about it right now. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to reiterate the same way we did last month that we are not doing a single unit sparking tier list. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the primary teams that are used in PvP right now. We're going to rank the primary teams, and then we're going to rank the top 10 single sparking units in the game. What we're going to do for units 6 through 10 is we're going to kind of throw them in a group as they're fairly close to power level, and then the top 5 we're going to break them out one by one and explain why exactly they sit in the spot that they sit in. With that being said, before we jump into the list itself, I want to give a huge shout out to everyone on my Discord. If you want to join my Discord, I'll make sure to throw that down in the description down below, and you can talk Dragon Ball Legends or any other game you want with us. We're in there every single day. And the other huge shout out is to Bebop. Thank you for all the input. He helped a lot with how I'm going to place these units. So with that being said, let's jump into the actual list. Okay, so there are other teams that are below this, but they're generally not used in PvP, or you see them so rarely that they don't even deserve to be on the list. This is the lowest ranking team that you will see every once in a great while, and it is the Androids team. The real issue with the Androids team right now is they don't really have any true heavy hitters. They don't have any 1 or 2 specific sparking units that you can really get behind to build a team around. The majority of the team is actually built around extreme units at the moment, which kind of tells you where their team sits as a whole in the meta. And that's not to say that extreme units are bad. There will be other teams that you're going to see in this list here in a moment that do have extreme units, and those extreme units can be very helpful. But if your whole team is built around extreme units, you're not in a very good position. Their main tank is not even in the primary combat team with Android 16. Most of their actual real damage dealers with Android 17 and Perfect Form Cell are not even in the actual team anymore. They're in a lot of trouble. They need some help. Let's move on to the next team. Number 10 is Hybrid Saiyans. This is a team that was not viable whatsoever a few weeks ago, but has now become viable again. I wouldn't say that they're on par with the very top teams, but they can actually do some damage. You can win some fights with them, and with the addition of adult future Gohan, it makes the old Super Saiyan 2 Gohan very viable again, simply because when the adult Gohan dies, he makes every other unit stronger. Super Saiyan 2 Gohan was starting to fall a little bit due to power creep, but because of that buff, once the adult Gohan dies, Super Saiyan 2 Gohan becomes a monster once again. With that in mind, this team does still have some power issues, and if you don't have the 3 core units that are listed here, there are alternate units, but the power of the team as a whole and the efficiency of the team is going to fall quite a bit if you have to replace any of these top 3 units, and is already a team that's not super viable in PvP. It's really on that borderline. So they don't have a lot of flexibility at the moment, and that's kind of why they sit where they sit right now. Let's move on to number 9, Regeneration. This is a team that before Zamasu was completely useless, for lack of a better word, couldn't really be used in PvP at all, was not viable, but now that you have Zamasu, the team is immensely tanky. The only true issue they have right now is that they don't have a lot of damage potential. Zamasu himself has a good damage output, but not absolutely amazing, and then Boo and Janemba don't have great damage potential, but they are very tanky units, and they have a lot of abilities that can lock other units down, specifically with the Boo being able to lock a unit in when he switches, and you have the Janemba, who is very shifty when it comes to the defense side. If you try to hit him with a Ki Blast or any type of ranged attack, he can turn that around on you. So the team as a whole, super tanky, especially with Zamasu's heals. If they had some true damage potential, they'd be considerably higher on this list. And one more thing to note here is from Regeneration up, you have teams that are not necessarily the best team in the world, but they're good enough that the matchup is going to come down to your skill versus your opponent's skill. So you can take this team in against maybe not the very best team on this list, but number 2 and number 3 for sure, and it's going to be determined more by your skill level than it will be by the team itself. So the gap between the best team and the mid-tier teams has lessened quite a bit in the current meta, which says to me that in the very near future here, we're probably going to get another game-breaking unit, so that way some team can shoot way out ahead of everyone else. But for the moment, we're having a very diverse meta. Let's move on to the next team. Number 8 is Frieza Force. You're going to notice something here. There's actually 4 core units, so the units that you're going to bring into battle are going to change a little bit. You're going to bring the Final Form Frieza, and you're going to bring the Vegeta for sure. Now, you have 2 options here. You have the Captain Ginyu, which is going to give you the extra green cards that both of those other 2 characters really need, or you have the Extreme Dodoria. With the two very powerful equipment items that Extreme Dodoria can use, he is essentially a sparking unit, and he can make your Final Form Frieza an absolute monster as far as the ability to deal damage. The reason that you would bring the Dodoria is if you see a very powerful purple Saiyan unit, best example of that being Broly. So if your opponent brings Broly, you probably want to bring the Dodoria, and that will allow your Final Form Frieza to immediately get rid of that Dodoria. Once you've done that, you really don't have to worry about the rest of their team because this team is fairly cohesive at that point. Now, the problem with this team is there's not a lot of flexibility. You pretty much have those 4 characters as your options to bring and not too much else. But the nice thing is, as long as you don't get specifically hard countered by multiple purple units, specifically multiple purple units that are not Saiyans, because Frieza obviously deals best with Saiyans, then you should be good in most cases. Or if you have a unit that specifically targets Frieza Force characters, you're also going to be in trouble because you, like I said, don't have a ton of flexibility here. Outside of that, you don't have a lot of very specific lockdown, but you do have the green card from Frieza, which allows you to stop opponents in their tracks. It can stop Rising Rushes. You can also absorb a Rising Rush with the Vegeta, so the team does have a lot of viability to it. They're just reasonably easy to counter. So let's move on to the next team. Number 7 is Female Warriors. This is a team that was not viable whatsoever. In fact, it was only on my last list just for laughs, essentially. It was probably the worst team on the list. It has now gone from the worst team to a middle of the pack team, and it may even be better than middle of the pack. 2 of the core units for this team came out yesterday, so we haven't had enough time to truly understand how powerful they actually are. On paper, they look very powerful. In the few matches that I've been in with them, they've done extremely well, but there's no way to place them too much higher without having quite a bit more data. So at this point, they're sort of middle of the pack, but it seems like they're going to end up a little higher. So right now they're ranked 7th. In a week or two, when we reassess this, they're probably going to be closer to maybe 4th or 5th. They're very powerful units. Caulifla specifically has immense damage potential. Mai has a ton of lockdown with her green card. Her ability to stop attacks in their tracks is very powerful, and you have a fair amount of flexibility. Obviously, you have those 3 core units, and then if you need to switch out specific colors, you can pull a yellow in, you can pull a blue in. So if color advantage is specifically something that you need, you can take care of that. Overall, this team has made leaps and bounds in the past few weeks. So let's move on to number 6. Number 6 is the Future Team. This team has become very powerful simply because Zamasu is a healing beast. He is super tanky. He gets even stronger once the Gohan dies, who can tank a fair amount of damage for you. If you do get Rising Rushed, you essentially have 2 options there. You can stop it with Zamasu, and he will get some health back when he dies, or you can stop it with Gohan, and that will just make your other 2 characters stronger. As we stated before, Mai has an immensely powerful green card, and the only reason that this team sits where they do is because every team above them has a considerably higher damage potential as we start to get into units who can almost one-combo many other units. So let's move on to the next team. Number 5 is the Saiyan team. Some even call this the Saiyan Strike team because it is very strike biased, but there are a few things you can do to kind of switch that bias away, so that way when you do have to use blast cards, it allows you to still do reasonable damage with those cards and use them efficiently. Now, as far as the core units go, their damage potential is phenomenal. The Kaioken Goku, once he uses his main ability, will absolutely steamroll most opponents. The green Vegeta, using his green card, can do very powerful combos, assuming that they're all strike cards, which is why this is more of a strike biased team. And then you have many options for that third character. Most people will stick with the purple Super Saiyan 3 Goku, but you can switch out to Bardock if you want more lockdown, although I would say that's probably not your best option. You can do that. It gives you a little bit more utility. And then you have lots of bench options based on how you want to set your team up. So you can run the blue Raditz, you can run the Shallot, and that will give you a lot more health, because the one issue with this team is one of your 3 units is super fragile in that Super Saiyan 3 Goku. So it's probably a good idea to add more health if you're going to run him. If you're not going to run him, you have lots of other options. You can throw the Majin Vegeta on your bench because he does give a lot of blast attack. You can throw the Bardock, the Super Saiyan Goku. Those both give more strike. So you have tons and tons of options for your bench on this team, which makes it a very flexible team as a whole, and that's why they sit where they sit. Let's move on to number 4. This is the Immortal Team. They actually don't have a tag that binds them all together. The key here is that you have 2 characters that can be Rising Rushed and then will come back from that Rising Rush, so they can't be killed by it assuming they haven't died yet. And then the great thing about this team is that they have immense longevity. So if your Zamasu gets Rising Rushed or your Vegeta gets Rising Rushed and the rest of your team has been hurt, one of those 2 characters, whoever gets Rising Rushed, is going to heal back to 20% or so. Zamasu is going to then be able to heal your entire team for another 25%, and then Vegeta, if he wants to, can heal himself for another 25%. and if you go with Broly as your third unit, he has the ability to use his main ability and heal. So this team is immensely tanky. They have the ability to essentially give themselves 2 lives, and they have very good damage potential. All 3 of those units have good potential. If you don't want to bring the Broly, you can bring the Goku. He's a good unit as well, and he has excellent damage potential too. Now what you'll notice down in the notable bench and alternate units here is pretty much all of these units are going to buff whatever 2 units you bring that are not Zamasu. So you can bring the Captain Ginyu and the Dodoria if you plan on bringing the Broly and the Vegeta, and they'll both get buffed because they're Frieza Force units. You can bring the Raditz because he will buff either of those options because they're Saiyans. So you do have a few options here, and how you lay your bench out is going to depend on which of those 2 units you choose between the Broly and the Goku. I would probably go with the Broly, but you can go with the Goku if you weren't lucky enough to pull the Broly, and this team will still be very, very effective. So let's move on to number 3. Okay, number 3 is the Sagas from the Movies team. So there's a lot of options here. Pretty much the key is you probably want to bring the Gogeta, and you probably want to bring the Super Saiyan Broly, the Sparking Purple. Now, you have a ton of other options for who you bring for your third unit. The great thing about this specific setup right here is if they bring yellow units to try and counter your Broly, you have 2 reds that will easily be able to take care of that yellow unit, and then you can switch your Broly in and allow him to pretty much wipe the team. The other great thing here is, as you notice down below, there is a ton of flexibility on this team, and there are a lot of tag abilities so that you can get huge ability bonuses for this team as a whole. There's massive damage potential. You can get very tanky on the team in general. There aren't a lot of things here that are going to increase all of their HP, but you can increase their secondary defense stats and definitely increase their secondary offensive stats, so you should be able to crush most opponents with this team in general. Let's move on to team number 2. Okay, so team number 2 is Lineage of Evil. This is essentially the Holy Trinity, but the evil version. You have your Final Form Coora, Cooler, whatever you want to call him, who is essentially your Super Saiyan Bardock. You switch him out, you switch in one of your other Lineage of Evil characters, and they do a ton of damage. That's pretty much how this works. You also get massive buffs when Chilled dies. You get very good strike damage potential from the Final Form Frieza anytime he's attacking a Saiyan, and in general his stats are just still very good since the balance changes, I want to say, what was it, about a month ago? And then one thing you'll notice down in the bench area is we do have a Lineage of Evil character down there, but the majority of the other characters in the Lineage of Evil bench are not necessarily going to buff that tag because there aren't a lot of options to buff that tag. They're sort of there to buff 1 to 2 out of the 3 units there and to buff them fairly heavily because these 3 units are pretty much the core of what you need to be running if you're going to run Lineage of Evil. And then you have the green First Form Cooler Coora in case you need to have any type of switch out for color advantage over a specific unit. So with that being said, before we move on to the number 1 team, I just want to mention that the gap between the best team and all of the other teams in the game has become increasingly small. So last tier list, it was pretty much the number 1 team and then there was everyone else. And if you had the number 1 team, you were going to steamroll everyone in PvP. That's not really the case anymore. I would say at least any team in the top 5 right now has a reasonably good chance of winning a match. If you have this number 1 team, you definitely have an advantage, but it's not an insurmountable advantage for anyone else that's fighting against the number 1 team. So let's go ahead and move on to them. Super Saiyan. Some people call this the Holy Trinity still, and we still do use those top 3 units from the Holy Trinity, but the key to the Super Saiyan team as a whole is the fact that the Super Saiyan Bardock gives so much flexibility and viability that you can switch out those other 2 units. You can definitely switch out the Gogeta for some other Super Saiyan, and you're going to get close to, not quite the same, but close to the same amount of damage potential, and it can give you a color advantage if you necessarily feel you need that, or if you need some other type of utility, because one thing you'll notice down below is there are a ton of units that you can bring in if you need a different color, if you need some very specific skill set or toolkit to deal with any specific unit. So not only do you have the Holy Trinity now, you have a lot of utility outside of that, whereas in the last month, it was pretty much the Holy Trinity. You had to bring those specific units, and then maybe you had one option for one other combat unit you could bring. So one of the things I really want everyone to take away from this is that the teams as a whole, at least at the very top, are starting to become very flexible. It's not necessarily that you're going to see 3 specific units every single time, and the meta itself is becoming more diverse. It's not necessarily that you're going to see this Holy Trinity every single time. You still do see it a lot because a lot of people haven't adjusted to the meta yet, but when you get to the higher level of play, you're going to see a fair amount of teams that are not necessarily this specific team. So let's move on to the actual sparking ranking of single characters. Okay, so as I stated earlier, units 6 through 10 are not ranked in order, and the reason for that is, while I could rank them in order, there's so much diversity in the meta now that I don't think it makes sense to put them in a specific order. There are characters in this group of 5 right here that if you compare them 1 to 1, one is better than the other, but the team that they sit on may not be as good as the other person's team, and that's because of that specific character. So that character technically, meta-wise, is a better unit than Unit A versus Unit B. So the reason that I haven't put those in order is because it would be misleading, and I think it would be deceptive to tell you that one of those is better than the other. I think they're all very close in value. And with that, let's move on to the top 5. Number 5, Kaioken Goku. He was in the top 5 last Sparking tier list. He's still in the top 5, although he's at the very edge now. Once he uses his main ability, he's an absolute monster. He has immense damage potential. He has great stats overall. For the first 20 seconds, once you use a green card, he's going to be essentially unkillable. And your job for that 20 timer count period is to make sure that he doesn't kill your units. Outside of that, he obviously has the nuke of his special move. Once he's used the green card, he can special move somebody, and it should kill most units. The only thing you really have to worry about when using this character is that his transformation only lasts for 60 timer counts. The positive there, though, is 60 timer counts is fairly long. In most cases, that's going to be the entire battle. I have seen battles go longer, but it's very few and far between that they go beyond 60 timer counts. So let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is Zamasu. There's a few different reasons that he is so high on this list. 1, he's extremely tanky. 2, he can stop a Rising Rush and then heal from it. 3, he can heal the entire team. 4, his tags are great, so he has actually made multiple teams viable again. 5, his damage potential is actually very good for a defensive unit, and I like the fact that he's starting to go into this specific damage type meta where he buffs up slice damage. So assuming you have other characters on your team that also use slice damage, you can use his green card, and it will affect your opponent with an attribute downgrade so that your other characters can do more damage. So you've got an immensely tanky unit that can also be a support unit by healing your team and increasing the damage a little bit, and he's got good damage potential, so he is an all-around fantastic unit. Let's move on to number 3. Final Form Coora, Cooler, whatever you want to call him, is essentially the Lineage of Evil version of Super Saiyan Bardock. When he switches into battle, he gets a damage buff. When he switches out of battle, all Lineage of Evil characters get a huge damage and crit buff, allowing them to do those giant crit damage combos that you see from the Super Saiyan team currently. Beyond that, he has an amazing green card that allows him to turn blast cards into strike cards, which is super powerful considering he and the majority of his team is based on strike cards, and in general, strike cards are more powerful with the current combat system in comparison to blast cards. So he's a fantastic unit. He's the unit that makes the Lineage of Evil team rival the Super Saiyan team. So let's move on to number 2. Super Saiyan Bardock. He is essentially a carbon copy of Coora, or Cooler is a carbon copy of him since he came out first. He does the same thing, but essentially for the Super Saiyan team. The major differences here: 1, his green card allows him to add extra longevity to his character because he can heal and get rid of attribute downgrades. 2, if he uses his special move against an opponent, it can reduce their card draw speed by 1 level, which can be fairly powerful in certain situations. Outside of that, the reason that we put him above his other version is simply because the units that he buffs are more powerful and more plentiful at the moment than the units buffed by Final Form Cooler. So let's move on to number 1. An absolute surprise to no one, the number 1 unit in the game is still Super Saiyan Broly. We don't need to go through his absolutely ridiculous stats once he transforms. We don't need to talk about the fact that he heals once he transforms, his blast armor, his ability to switch out units that he doesn't want to face, his ability to remove unfavorable color disadvantage when he switches in, the fact that he increases damage every time he gets hurt. This unit is still absolutely insane. But one thing to keep in mind here is the field behind him as a whole is sneaking up on him. He's still got a pretty considerable difference in power between himself and all the other units, but they're starting to get there, and I think in the very near future we're going to start to see units, maybe not in the next banner or next 2 banners, but in a few banners after that we're going to start to see units that eclipse his power. So for now, he is the number 1 unit. If you have him, use him. Unless you're a tryhard trying to flex on people and use a bunch of crappy units, do that, fine. But he is the unit that you want to bring into PvP if you're trying to win. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys think I missed anything, throw it down below. If you think there's any character that's supposed to be in the top 10 that wasn't, throw that down there and let's talk about it too. And if you guys like this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.